In exactly 45 minutes, a 133-year-old elite club would be forced to shut its doors forever. The Marrow and Guilt Club, a fortress of exclusivity that had weathered world wars, economic crashes, and social revolutions, would crumble in less time than it takes to watch a TV episode. But let's rewind to 8:30 p.m. on that crisp Thursday evening in Manhattan. A midnight blue Maybach glides through the city streets, its polished surface reflecting the glow of streetlights. Inside sits Zaire Obasi, tech mogul, billionaire, and the youngest black CEO to ever reach 12-figure wealth. Tonight, he's heading to a place where his kind has never been welcomed. What happens when old money meets new power and racism collides with consequence? The Maybach pulls up to an imposing building on Fifth Avenue. Doormen in pristine uniforms rush forward. This is the moment Zaire has worked 20 years to reach, acceptance into America's most exclusive business circle. But sometimes, the doors we fight hardest to open reveal the ugliest truths about who controls them. Have you ever walked into a room where you knew you weren't wanted? Where your success meant nothing because of your skin color? Where every achievement on your resume became invisible the moment they saw your face? Tonight, Zaire would experience that feeling in the most humiliating way. He'd be denied access to a bathroom, asked to produce his invitation like a suspected intruder, told he didn't know his place, all because some people believed his billions couldn't buy him basic human dignity. But here's what those old money gatekeepers didn't understand. Zaire wasn't just another rich man seeking their approval. He was a force of nature who'd built his empire from phone cards sold on Lego streets. A man who'd turned every door slammed in his face into fuel for his fire. The institutional racism festering within America's elite circles was about to meet its match. These weren't just microaggressions. This was systematic exclusion disguised as tradition. For 133 years, the Marrow and Guilt Club had operated as a white boys' club, hiding behind leather chairs and crystal chandeliers while keeping successful people of color on the outside. But what this billionaire did next would change everything. His response would expose their hypocrisy to the world, cost them millions in sponsorships, and prove that in the age of social media, discrimination has consequences. If you've ever felt like an outsider fighting to belong, hit that like button. This story will show you the power of turning humiliation into transformation. Because sometimes, the greatest victories come from our worst defeats. 24 years earlier, a skinny teenager named Zaire Obasi stood on a dusty street corner in Lagos, Nigeria, clutching a handful of phone cards. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as he called out to passers-by, his voice hoarse from hours of hawking his wares. "Airtime! Fresh airtime!" he shouted, sweat dripping down his face. Most people walked past without a glance. But Zaire wasn't just selling phone cards. He was studying patterns. Which corners generated the most foot traffic? What time of day did people need airtime most? How could he optimize his small operation for maximum profit? His mother, Zaire Obasi, was a primary school teacher who earned barely enough to keep food on their table. Every evening, she'd count the naira notes Zaire brought home, her tired eyes lighting up with pride. "Education is the only way out," she'd tell him, her calloused hands holding his face. "But you must be 10 times better than everyone else to get half the recognition." Those words would echo in Zaire's mind for decades. When the opportunity came to immigrate to America at 16, Adani sold everything, her jewelry, furniture, even her late husband's watch, to buy Zaire a plane ticket. At the airport, she pressed a worn envelope into his hands. Inside was $200 and a note. "Build bridges, not walls. Love, Mama." JFK Airport, New York. A bewildered teenager emerges with a battered suitcase, speaking broken English, with no family, no connections, no safety net. Just raw determination and his mother's voice in his head. The first years were brutal. Zaire worked 3 jobs while attending community college: dishwasher at a restaurant, night security guard, and weekend stock clerk. Between shifts, he taught himself to code on library computers, staying until closing time every night. Sleep became a luxury. Meals were often skipped. But every rejection letter, every racist comment, every door slammed in his face only hardened his resolve. At 19, Zaire built his first mobile app, a simple inventory tracker for small businesses. He sold it to a local bodega owner for $500. That night, he called his mother, his voice shaking with excitement. "Mama, I sold my first program." Her laughter across the crackling international connection was worth more than any amount of money. The breakthrough came during his senior year at NYU. While other students partied, Zaire developed a revolutionary algorithm that could predict supply chain disruptions for retailers. He pitched it to 50 venture capitalists. 49 said no. The 50th, a woman named Patricia Chin, saw something special. "You're not just building software," she told him. "You're solving problems that affect real people." That $50,000 investment became the seed money for Obasi Innovations. Enter Ayana Kinte, a Spelman College valedictorian with an MBA from Stanford and a mind like a steel trap. She met Zaire at a tech conference where he was speaking about bridging the digital divide. While other executives talked about profits, Zaire talked about purpose. "I want to work for someone who remembers where they came from," Ayana told him after his presentation. She became his chief of staff, the strategic mind behind his vision, and the sister he never had. Dr. Solomon Masigo completed their inner circle. The son of South African immigrants, Solomon was a brilliant engineer who'd faced his own battles with discrimination in Silicon Valley. When he met Zaire, he saw a kindred spirit, someone who understood that their success carried the weight of representation. "We're not just building a company," Solomon would say during their late-night strategy sessions. "We're proving that excellence has no color." Together, they grew Obasi Innovations from a 3-person startup to a global tech empire. Their breakthrough came with affordable medical devices for rural communities, followed by clean energy solutions for developing nations. Every product addressed real-world problems that traditional tech companies ignored. When Forbes announced Zaire as America's youngest black billionaire, he wasn't celebrating. He was in his office at 3 a.m., working on the next innovation. Success hadn't changed him. It had amplified his purpose. But with success came scrutiny. Every business decision was dissected. Every public appearance was analyzed. The pressure was relentless. Zaire carried not just his own dreams, but the hopes of millions who saw themselves in his story. His mother's words haunted him. "You must be 10 times better to get half the recognition." Now, at 32, Zaire commanded respect in boardrooms across America. His net worth exceeded $12 billion. World leaders sought his counsel. Yet he still felt the weight of proving himself worthy of spaces where his presence challenged decades of exclusion. Tonight would be the ultimate test. The Marrow and Gilt Club stood like a monument to old American power on Fifth Avenue. Founded in 1892 by railroad barons and steel magnates, it had operated for 133 years with one unspoken rule: membership was reserved for white men of proper breeding. Presidents had dined within its walls. Supreme Court justices had debated landmark cases in its library. Titans of industry had carved up markets over aged whiskey in its smoking room. For over a century, it had remained a bastion of exclusivity where handshake deals worth billions were struck between men who looked exactly alike. The invitation that arrived at Zaire's office 3 weeks earlier was more than social courtesy. It was historic. Embossed on cream-colored cardstock with gold lettering, it represented a seismic shift. The old guard was finally acknowledging the new, or so it seemed. The midnight blue Maybach rolled to a stop beneath the club's grand entrance. Valets in pristine uniforms rushed forward as Zaire stepped out, adjusting his tailored tuxedo. Ayana emerged from the passenger side, elegant in her black evening gown, while Solomon exited from the opposite door, checking his watch. They moved as a unit, 3 successful black professionals entering a space that had excluded their kind for generations. The doorman, a distinguished gentleman with silver hair, greeted them with practiced politeness. Good evening. Welcome to Marrow and Guilt. As they crossed the threshold, time seemed to slow. The club's interior was a testament to wealth accumulated over centuries. Mahogany panels lined the walls, polished to mirror perfection. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across Persian rugs that had graced these floors since the Gilded Age. Oil portraits of long-dead industrialists stared down from their frames, their painted eyes following the new arrivals. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of aged leather, expensive cigars, and old money. Conversations didn't stop exactly, but they shifted. Voices dropped to whispers. Heads turned with the subtlety of seasoned diplomats, stealing glances while maintaining facades of indifference. Some faces registered genuine curiosity about the famous tech mogul. Others revealed barely concealed skepticism. On his trained eye caught every micro-expression, every sideways glance. She leaned close to Zaire, her voice barely audible. "You're making history just by being here." Zaire nodded, his expression calm but alert. He'd navigated hostel rooms before, but never one so steeped in tradition and resistance to change. A club manager approached, a thin man with silver hair and cold eyes named Reginald Hawthorne. His smile was polished but didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Obasi, what an honor. May I take your coat?" The exchange was cordial, professional, yet something felt off. Hawthorne's tone carried an undertone that suggested this hospitality was performance, not genuine warmth. Solomon, ever the diplomat, immediately began working the room. His natural charisma and gift for storytelling quickly drew a small crowd of venture capitalists and tech investors. He regaled them with tales of Silicon Valley's early days, weaving humor into stories of startup failures and breakthrough moments. "The night we sold our first major contract, Zaire called me at 2 a.m. screaming so loud I thought someone had died." Solomon laughed, the group hanging on every word. "Turns out he was just excited we could finally afford real office furniture instead of folding tables from Target." Laughter rippled through the circle, the tension easing momentarily. Meanwhile, Zaire found himself surrounded by a different crowd, older members whose questions felt more like interviews than conversations. They probed about his business model, his expansion plans, his philosophy on success. Each query seemed designed to test whether he truly belonged in their rarefied circle. A woman in pearls leaned forward conspiratorially. "Tell me, Mr. Obasi, how do you maintain your cultural authenticity while achieving such mainstream success?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Zaire recognized it for what it was, a politely worded challenge to his legitimacy in this space. "Drop a comment if you've ever been the first in a space. Your story matters too." The evening was just beginning, but already the battle lines were being drawn. 8:45 p.m. The clock on the mahogany mantelpiece chimed as Zaire excused himself from a conversation about emerging markets in Africa. The evening had been proceeding smoothly. Handshakes, business cards exchanged, tentative bridges built. He needed a moment to collect his thoughts before the formal dinner presentation. "Excuse me, gentlemen. I'll be right back." The restroom was down a corridor lined with portraits of distinguished club members, men whose legacies were carved into American business history. Their painted eyes seemed to follow Zaire as he walked past, their expressions frozen in perpetual judgment. He was 10 feet from the mahogany door marked Gentlemen's Lounge when Reginald Hawthorne materialized from nowhere, flanked by 2 security guards in dark suits. "I'm sorry, sir." Hawthorne's voice had lost all pretense of hospitality. "This area is reserved for members only." Zaire stopped, confusion flickering across his face. "I was just heading to the restroom. The hostess mentioned it was down this hall." Hawthorne's thin smile vanished completely. "I'm afraid you've been misinformed. The facilities for guests are located on the lower level." The words hit like ice water. Zaire glanced at the brass plaque on the door. "Gentlemen's restroom. Members only." He looked back at Hawthorne, whose arms were now crossed in a defensive posture that blocked the way entirely. "I see," Zaire said quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation burning in his chest. "Thank you for the clarification." He turned to leave, but one of the security guards stepped forward, his hand moving towards Zaire's chest. "Sir, I'll need to see your invitation." The corridor suddenly felt smaller. 3 other club members had appeared as if summoned by some invisible signal, their conversations dying as they witnessed the confrontation. A woman in diamonds pulled out her phone. Zaire reached into his jacket and produced the embossed invitation, his movements deliberate and controlled. The guard examined it with theatrical thoroughness, as if checking for forgeries, before handing it back without comment. As Zaire turned to walk away, Hawthorne's voice followed him down the corridor, loud enough for the gathering witnesses to hear. "Some people just don't know their place." The words struck deeper than any physical blow. Not because they were surprising. Zaire had heard variations of this refrain his entire life, but because they crystallized everything wrong with spaces like this. His billions, his innovations, his charitable work, his global influence, none of it mattered to men like Hawthorne. In their eyes, he would forever be that teenage boy selling phone cards on Lagos streets. By 8:52 p.m., whispers had begun circulating through the main ballroom like wildfire. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Eyes darted toward Zaire as he rejoined his party, his expression carefully neutral. Ayana read his face immediately. "What happened?" Zaire recounted the incident in low tones, his voice barely controlled fury. Solomon's jaw tightened with each detail. "We should leave," he urged. "This isn't worth your dignity." But Zaire shook his head. "No. We were invited here as equals, and we're staying until this event ends. I won't give them the satisfaction of running me off." What none of them realized was that the woman with diamonds had already uploaded the video. The footage was grainy but unmistakable. Hawthorne blocking Zaire's path, the demand for documentation, the dismissive tone that dripped with centuries of entitlement. Within minutes, Zaire's social media manager Jabari was calling. "Boss, you need to see this. #Obasi is already trending." The video exploded across platforms. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, millions of views in real time. Comments poured in from celebrities, politicians, and everyday people who recognized the familiar sting of discrimination dressed up as policy. Celebrity chef Marcus Williams, "This is 2023? Really? Zaire Obasi deserves better than this garbage." Congresswoman Angela Davis, "Institutional racism alive and well at NYC's most prestigious club. Disgusting." NBA star Jerome Collins, "Same energy that kept our grandfathers out of hotels. Some things never change." #Black Excellence at 9:15 p.m., the club's president, Evelyn Van Doren, took the podium for her scheduled remarks. A woman in her 70s with silver hair and cold blue eyes, she commanded attention as conversations died. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate not just business excellence, but the importance of preserving our club's unique character and cherished traditions." Her words, though carefully chosen, carried unmistakable meaning. The emphasis on character and traditions felt like daggers aimed directly at the new arrivals who didn't fit the club's centuries-old mold. Membership in Marrow and Guild has always been about more than financial success. It's about understanding our values, respecting our heritage, and maintaining the standards that have made this institution a beacon of American excellence for 133 years. Zaire sat stone-faced, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Around him, some members looked uncomfortable, avoiding eye contact. Others nodded approvingly at Van Doren's thinly veiled message. His phone buzzed constantly, interview requests from CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. The story had reached major news outlets. #Obasi was trending in 12 countries. The internal struggle was excruciating. Every instinct screamed at him to stand up and leave, to escape this suffocating atmosphere of barely concealed hatred. But another voice, his mother's, whispered about dignity, about not giving them the satisfaction of breaking him. How would you have handled this moment? Have you ever had to choose between your dignity and fitting in? At 9:30 p.m., Zaire made his decision. He stood slowly, his movement causing heads to turn throughout the ballroom. The conversations didn't just pause, they stopped entirely. He walked to the center of the room with measured steps, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space with quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for this evening's hospitality. I came here tonight as a guest, as a fellow business leader, and as someone who believed in the power of bringing different perspectives together." The room was dead silent. But tonight, I was reminded that for some, old habits die harder than old money. I hope that in the future, this club and institutions like it will choose to judge people by the content of their character rather than the color of their bank account or their skin. He paused, letting the words settle. Excellence has no color. Innovation knows no boundaries. And true leadership means opening doors, not guarding them. With that, Zaire nodded once to the room, turned, and walked toward the exit. Ayanna and Solomon flanked him, their heads held equally high. Behind them, chaos erupted. Voices rose in heated arguments. Some members demanded Hawthorne's immediate resignation. Others defended the club's right to maintain standards. But Zaire didn't look back. He had said his piece with dignity intact. The real consequences were just beginning. 9:31 p.m. Exactly 1 minute after Zaire's dignified exit, the first news van pulled up outside the Marrow and Gilt Club. By 9:35, Fifth Avenue looked like a breaking news epicenter. Satellite trucks, camera crews, and reporters jockeying for position under the club's ornate entrance. Inside the ballroom, pandemonium had replaced polite conversation. "This is unconscionable," shouted Lila Chun, the venture capitalist who joined the club just 2 years earlier. "We just witnessed blatant discrimination in real time." Charles Pembroke, a third-generation member whose grandfather had helped found the club, fired back. "We have protocols. Standards. This reaction is completely overblown." "Standards?" Chin's voice rose above the din. "You mean racism disguised as tradition?" Van Doren tried desperately to restore order, but her authority had evaporated the moment Zaire walked out. Members were choosing sides, voices escalating, decades of suppressed tensions exploding into open conflict. 9:38 p.m. The first major sponsor bailed. Goldman Sachs, which had underwritten club events for 15 years, issued a terse statement. "We cannot continue our association with organizations that practice discrimination. Effective immediately, we are withdrawing our sponsorship of all Marrow and Gilt activities." The club's treasurer, William Morrison, burst into the ballroom waving his phone. "Goldman just pulled out. That $2.3 million in annual funding." 9:42 p.m. The dominoes accelerated. McKinsey and Company followed Goldman's lead. Then J.P. Morgan Chase. Then American Express. Each withdrawal came with public statements condemning the club's treatment of Zaire, amplifying the story across news cycles and social media feeds. The hashtag Obasi at Marrowgilt hashtag had exploded beyond trending. It was now a global phenomenon. The original video had been shared over 500,000 times. News outlets from CNN to BBC were running the story. Late-night talk show hosts were already crafting monologues about old money, new problems. 9:45 p.m. New York City Mayor Patricia Williams released a statement that landed like a sledgehammer. "The treatment of Mr. Obasi at the Marrow and Gilt Club tonight represents everything wrong with institutional exclusion in our city. No business, private club or otherwise, should operate with such blatant disregard for human dignity." The City of New York will be reviewing all permits and licenses associated with this establishment. The legal implications hit club leadership like lightning. Operating licenses, liquor permits, fire safety certifications, all suddenly vulnerable to municipal review. 9:48 p.m. The membership exodus began. Rebecca Torres, CEO of a major pharmaceutical company, stormed into the club's administrative office. "Cancel my membership immediately. I refuse to be associated with this embarrassment." She wasn't alone. The club's phones rang nonstop as members demanded cancellations. The resignation letters flooded in via email faster than staff could process them. Tech mogul David Kim posted his resignation letter publicly on LinkedIn. After 8 years as a member, Tonight's disgraceful treatment of Zaire Obasi has shown me this institution's true character. I'm out. 9:52 p.m. Van Doren called an emergency board meeting in the club's walnut-paneled library. The 12-member board assembled in crisis mode, their faces reflecting the gravity of their situation. Gentlemen and ladies, Van Doren began, her usual commanding presence reduced to desperate damage control. We need immediate action to contain this situation. Board member Harrison Wells, whose family had been members since 1902, shook his head grimly. Evelyn, there's no containing this. We've lost 6 major sponsors in 20 minutes. Half our membership is resigning. The mayor's threatening our operating permits. Financial Officer Morrison spread spreadsheets across the mahogany table. If this continues, we'll be bankrupt within the month. Our operating budget depends entirely on sponsorships and membership fees. 9:55 p.m. The final blow came from an unexpected source. The club's insurance company, Hartford Financial, sent an urgent notice. Due to reputational risks and potential liability exposure, we are terminating coverage effective midnight tonight. No insurance meant no legal operation. The club couldn't host events, serve alcohol, or even remain open without liability protection. Van Doren's phone buzzed with a text from the club's largest individual donor, oil heiress Margaret Rothschild, withdrawing my $50 million endowment pledge. This is not the institution I thought I was supporting. The room fell silent. Without Rothschild's endowment, the club's planned renovations and expansion were dead. More critically, her withdrawal would trigger a cascade of other major donors reconsidering their commitments. 9:58 p.m. Hawthorne, the architect of the evening's disaster, appeared in the library doorway. His face was ashen, his earlier arrogance completely evaporated. The staff is asking if they should continue serving, he said quietly. Several members have demanded I be fired immediately. Board member Chen looked around the table. Reginald, your actions tonight have destroyed this institution. You need to resign. Now. Hawthorne nodded miserably and placed his club keys on the table. I'll clear out my office. 10 p.m. Exactly 45 minutes after Zaire had walked out with dignity intact, the Marrow and Guilt Club's board faced an impossible reality. Morrison delivered the financial death sentence. We've lost $8.2 million in confirmed sponsorship withdrawals. Insurance is canceled. The city's threatening our permits. We have no choice. The vote was swift and unanimous. Suspend all operations pending a complete investigation and restructuring. Van Doren's hands shook as she signed the temporary closure order. 133 years of tradition had crumbled in less time than a lunch break. The club that had weathered 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless social upheavals had been brought down by a single act of racism caught on camera and amplified by social media. As staff began covering furniture with white sheets and locking doors, the full weight of consequence settled over Fifth Avenue. The Marrow and Guilt Club, a symbol of American elite exclusion, had learned that in the digital age, discrimination has an expiration date. Share this video if you believe actions have consequences. Let's make sure this message reaches everyone who needs to hear it. Outside, reporters continued their live broadcasts as the club's lights dimmed one by one. The reckoning was complete. 3 days after the Marrow and Guilt Club's closure, Zaire stood in his Manhattan office overlooking Central Park. The media storm hadn't subsided. Interview requests flooded in, legal analysts debated discrimination laws on cable news, and #ObasiatMarrowGuilt continued trending globally. But Zaire wasn't focused on the chaos he'd left behind. He was designing something entirely new. Pain without purpose is just suffering, he told Ayanna as they reviewed preliminary plans spread across his conference table. But pain with purpose? That becomes power. The Obasi Fellowship was born from that humiliation in the club's corridor. While other billionaires collected art or yachts, Zaire decided to collect dreams, specifically the dreams of young entrepreneurs who looked like him and faced the same barriers he'd encountered. The fellowship launched 6 weeks later with a bold mission: identify 100 underrepresented entrepreneurs annually, provide them with $50,000 in seed funding, and, most importantly, grant them access to the networks that had been systematically closed to them. We're not just writing checks, Zaire announced at the launch event. We're opening doors that have been locked for generations. The response overwhelmed even Zaire's optimistic projections. Applications poured in from every state: Black women developing medical devices, Latino immigrants creating sustainable farming solutions, Native American college students building educational platforms. Each story reflected his own journey from outsider to insider. The fellowship's first cohort included Imani Duval, a 24-year-old financial analyst from Detroit who'd witnessed her grandmother lose her home to predatory lending. Imani's fintech startup, CreditBridge, helped low-income families build credit through rent and utility payments, transactions that traditional banks ignored. Nobody believed a young Black woman from Detroit could revolutionize consumer finance, Imani said during her fellowship presentation. But Mr. Obasi saw what others missed: that our lived experiences aren't disadvantages. They're our competitive advantage. CreditBridge raised $10 million in series of funding within 18 months, serving over 200,000 families nationwide. Another fellow, Kwame Boateng, had immigrated from Ghana with a PhD in chemical engineering and a revolutionary idea: solar-powered water purification systems for rural communities. Traditional investors had dismissed his concept as too niche and not scalable enough. The Obasi Fellowship saw differently. Kwame's innovation now provides clean drinking water to over 50,000 people across sub-Saharan Africa and rural America. His company, Aquasol, employs 300 people and has contracts with international development organizations. Zaire didn't just give me money, Kwame reflected. He gave me credibility. When I walked into investor meetings with the Obasi Fellowship backing, suddenly everyone listened. The fellowship's success triggered a national examination of exclusion in elite spaces. Harvard Business School launched its own inclusion initiative. The Wharton School created scholarships specifically for underrepresented entrepreneurs. Even Wall Street firms began reassessing their recruiting practices. Other exclusive clubs across the country faced their own reckonings. The Pacific Club in San Francisco quietly diversified its membership after sponsor pressure. The Metropolitan Club in Washington underwent leadership changes. The Union Club in New York created its first diversity committee in 157 years. What happened at Merrow and Gilt became a catalyst, explained Dr. Angela Washington, a Harvard professor studying institutional change. One moment of documented discrimination forced an entire ecosystem to examine its practices. Solomon spearheaded the fellowship's partnership strategy, connecting with historically Black colleges and universities, Hispanic-serving institutions, and tribal colleges. These partnerships created pipelines of talent that had been invisible to traditional venture capital. We're not just changing who gets funding, Solomon explained to a gathering of HBCU presidents. We're changing who gets to define innovation itself. Within 3 years, Obasi Fellowship alumni had launched 127 companies, created over 2,000 jobs, and attracted more than $400 million in follow-on investment. Their innovations ranged from AI-powered healthcare solutions to sustainable agriculture technologies, from educational platforms to clean energy systems. The fellowship's alumni network became a force multiplier. Early graduates mentored new fellows, creating a self-sustaining ecosystem of support. They collaborated on deals, shared resources, and opened doors for each other, building the inclusive networks that had been denied to previous generations. Meanwhile, the abandoned Merrow and Gilt building sat empty for 2 years, a monument to institutional failure. When it finally went on the market, Zaire made an unexpected move. He bought it. Some people asked why I'd want to own a place that humiliated me, Zaire said during the building's rededication ceremony. But I saw an opportunity to transform a symbol of exclusion into a beacon of inclusion. The building was completely reimagined. The Grand Ballroom became a co-working space for early-stage entrepreneurs. The library was converted into a startup incubator. The dining room became a community kitchen where fellows could host pitch events and networking dinners. Most symbolically, the corridor where Hawthorne had blocked Zaire's path was turned into the Dignity Hall, a gallery celebrating entrepreneurs who'd overcome discrimination to build successful businesses. At the center of the main hall hung a portrait of Zaire, not in a suit counting money, but in jeans and a t-shirt, surrounded by young entrepreneurs of every background. The plaque read, "Zaire Obasi, builder of bridges, opener of doors." 5 years after that humiliating night, Zaire stood on the stage of the Jacob Javits Center accepting the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his contributions to entrepreneurship and social justice. The audience of 5,000 included 200 Obasi Fellowship alumni who'd flown in from across the country. "Mr. President, distinguished guests," Zaire began, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium. "5 years ago, I was denied access to a bathroom because someone decided I didn't belong. Tonight, I stand before you not as a victim of that discrimination, but as proof that our greatest setbacks can become our most powerful comebacks." The ovation lasted 4 minutes. In the audience, Imani Duval wiped tears from her eyes. Kwame Boateng raised his fist in solidarity. Hundreds of young entrepreneurs who'd never heard of the Marrow and Guilt Club cheered for the man who'd turned his pain into their opportunity. "I was taught that when doors close, you don't just find another entrance," Zaire continued. "You build a house where everyone is welcome, and you make sure the doors never close again." The fellowship had grown beyond anyone's expectations. It now operated in 12 countries, had graduated over 800 entrepreneurs, and had created an estimated 15,000 jobs worldwide. More importantly, it had shifted the entire conversation about who deserves access to opportunity. Back at the transformed club building, new entrepreneurs worked late into the night, their laptops glowing in spaces where exclusion once reigned. Their dreams filled rooms that had once echoed with whispers of discrimination. The transformation was complete. 10 years have passed since that fateful night at the Marrow and Guilt Club. Zaire Obasi now sits in his transformed community center, watching a new generation of entrepreneurs pitch their ideas in the same ballroom where he was once made to feel unwelcome. The lessons from that evening continue to resonate far beyond one man's experience with discrimination. When doors close, you build your own house. This wasn't just a catchy phrase, it became Zaire's blueprint for transformation. When the club's restroom door was barred to him, he didn't just find another bathroom. He built an entire ecosystem where exclusion couldn't exist. The Obasi Fellowship didn't just open doors, it constructed entirely new pathways to success. Too often, we accept closed doors as final verdicts. We internalize rejection as personal failure. But Zaire's story proves that every slammed door is actually raw material for building something better. The question isn't whether you'll face exclusion, you will. The question is what you'll construct from that rejection. That corridor confrontation could have broken Zaire's spirit. Instead, it became his rocket fuel. The same energy that burned from Hawthorne's dismissive words powered years of relentless work to create opportunities for others. Humiliation has a unique power. It cuts deeper than ordinary failure because it attacks our dignity. But that same depth can be channeled into extraordinary motivation. Every entrepreneur in the Obasi Fellowship carries their own story of being underestimated, dismissed, or excluded. That shared pain became their collective strength. Zaire's response in that moment, calm, measured, dignified, changed everything. He could have screamed, stormed out, or lashed back. Instead, he chose grace under pressure. That choice made the difference between a personal grievance and a movement for change. Dignity doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. It means responding to injustice in a way that elevates both yourself and the cause you represent. When Zaire spoke to that room before leaving, he wasn't just defending himself. He was speaking for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. 45 minutes. That's all it took to topple a 133-year-old institution and spark nationwide reform. One smartphone video, shared by one witness, viewed by millions, created consequences that rippled across industries and continents. We live in an age where individual actions carry unprecedented power. Your response to injustice doesn't just affect you, it can influence thousands of people you'll never meet. Zaire's dignity in that moment gave permission to countless others to demand better treatment in their own spaces. The marrow and guilt closure wasn't an isolated event, it was the first domino in a chain reaction. Other exclusive institutions reformed their practices. Corporate America reassessed its diversity initiatives. Young entrepreneurs gained access to networks that had been closed for generations. Standing up for what's right doesn't just solve your immediate problem. It creates a precedent that empowers others to stand up too. Every person who joins the movement amplifies its impact exponentially. The most profound lesson from Zaire's journey is the difference between exclusion and inclusion as business strategies. The Marrow and Guilt Club hoarded access, believing scarcity created value. The Obasi Fellowship proved that abundance creates exponentially more value. When you help others succeed, you don't diminish your own success, you multiply it. The Fellowship's alumni network demonstrates that rising tides really do lift all boats. Collaboration beats competition every single time. Zaire's net worth continued growing after that night, but his real wealth became measured differently. His legacy isn't the billions in his bank account. It's the thousands of jobs created by Fellowship alumni, the innovations solving real-world problems, the barriers broken by entrepreneurs who followed his path. True success isn't what you accumulate for yourself. It's what you create for others. The most successful people in history are remembered not for what they achieved, but for what they enabled others to achieve. Every person watching this video will face their own marrow and guilt moment. A time when someone tries to make you feel like you don't belong, don't deserve success, or don't have what it takes. How you respond will define not just your future, but potentially the futures of people you haven't even met yet. What doors have been closed to you? Those rejections aren't endings. They're beginnings waiting to be written. How will you use your success to lift others? Your achievements only matter if they create opportunities for people coming behind you. What legacy do you want to leave? Will you be remembered as someone who hoarded opportunity or someone who multiplied it? The young entrepreneurs working in that transformed club building tonight aren't just building businesses. They're building a world where access is earned through excellence, not inherited through exclusion. They're proving that when you turn pain into purpose, humiliation into motivation, and barriers into bridges, you don't just change your own story. You change the world. If this story inspired you to turn your struggles into strength, subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share your own story of overcoming in the comments. Your experience could inspire someone else's breakthrough. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to "you don't belong here" is building a place where everyone does.